Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we are going over all things DFS ahead of Championship Sunday. As always, in this edition of the podcast, I'm joined by none other than Andrew Erickson, the prop prophet himself. Andrew, happy last DFS show, my friend. We have done this will be 21 straight weeks. I think we've had a lot of fun, a lot of success. Let's end on a high note, huh?
Yeah, no, for sure. Definitely got to end on a high note. I think that last week was good. No, I was checking over the props from last week, and I was like, oh my god, like I knew the Titans, tight ends really came through for us with basically just zeroing together. Ferkser, Jeff Swaim did literally nothing, so that was great to see. But yeah, no, excited. Just 2 games, so it's really easy to kind of talk it through. But every player matters. Who you pick between Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, it's all going to matter significantly.
Every play matters. And you know what, Andrew? If we lose, in the wise words of Tyler Durden, it could be worse. A woman could cut your penis off while you're sleeping and toss it out the window of a moving car. So that's kind of the strategy I'm going in here. Want to win money, but even if we don't, things could always be worse. So, yeah, like you said, just 2 games, nothing too crazy to go over here. So we're going to kind of abbreviate the cash game section a little bit because, Andrew, we do 21 straight of these. We end up being on the same page more times than not. Fairly straightforward with the way the pricing works out. I don't think you need to sacrifice too much, just overall kind of projection here. Usually we're trying to fight to find the best way to get the most points in the lineup. This week, I think it's easier than usual. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, running back, getting a little bit cheaper with Cam Akers and Jerick McKinnon, only so we can get all the way up to Cooper Kupp, maybe Jamar Chase, Byron Pringle. Also want Travis Kelce and Tyler Higbee in our tight end flex. Andrew, I'm with you on basically all this. I think the one kind of 2-for-2 question we need to have is what do we want to do at wide receiver? Because, yeah, we're getting up to Cooper Kupp. There's not a Kupp or Devontae Adams debate this week. Thank God, because, that was tough to go through and unfortunately didn't quite end up on the right side of it. With that said, the lineup I just spelled out, we're still a little bit over the number if we want to get up to Pringle. I'm with you. He is the number 2 in Kansas City in terms of snaps, targets, whatever you want to look at in that wide receiver room. With that said, if we go down 500 to Demarcus Robinson, then we can fit either Jamar Chase or Tyreek Hill in there. So we have Patrick Mahomes already. How do you feel Chase versus Tyreek, Andrew, if that's, exactly what it comes down to?
I think I prefer Chase, honestly. Last week we talked about, Tyreek Hill and how his price was just really, it didn't make a lot of sense. He was at 6,600, so then he obviously goes off over 30 fantasy points. And that's kind of how I looked at it with Jamar Chase. Like, why is Chase not priced up above 7K? He was just as good as a lot of these other guys we're talking about. Tyreek Hill, I'd argue he was more consistent than Tyreek Hill. I know Hill was dealing with some injuries coming off the COVID list. But, Chase has gone over 100 yards in his last 4 games, and he's not 7K. And, what are we thinking what is the defense going to do that's going to make us think, oh, well, Chase obviously can't go off in this game. The fact that he went for 250 yards the last time he played the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I don't think that just looking at last week's Gabriel Davis performance, all right, well, that means these Bengals receivers will go off. Obviously, the Chiefs were missing one of their top cornerbacks in Fenton. Tyrann Mathieu basically didn't play the entire game. So I don't think we're going to see necessarily as many fireworks from Josh Allen with Joe Burrow this specific week. But, I don't know what else we need to talk about with Chase. He has a 31% target share in the last 3 games that he has played. Joe Burrow has turned to him more than any other receiver in his offense, as of late. And I just think that makes it, that's higher than Cooper Kupp's target share, over the past 3 weeks. So, for me, I'm going to take the savings and play Jamar Chase.
Same thing. If we can get up even an extra $200 Chase versus Deebo Samuel, I think the answer is yes. It's great getting the rush attempts for Deebo, and the guy is so damn good that he's regularly making the most out of 8 to 10 of them. But Andrew, it's legal to also throw him the ball more than a handful of times per game. I think the stat is he hasn't had 5 catches. He's had 5 catches in the game once out of his last 9. And again, it just seems like with Chase, to your point, 4 straight with 100 yards against a defense that didn't even come close to having an answer for this dude. Chase probably does deserve to be the week's wide receiver 2 behind Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, no, he's definitely the guy that I liked the most. If you look at PFF's DFS optimizer, he comes in as the number 1 value wide receiver on the main slate. So, and again, if we just want to cement the play even further, check out PFF's wide receiver cornerback matchup chart. number one on the chart is Jamar Chase. So, that thing has had a pretty good hit rate, especially with these Bengals receivers. I feel like we've talked about T. Higgins, highlighting on there at some weeks, and he would go off that week. So, yeah, I mean, Jamar Chase, everything is there for the taking, and I think that he's just mispriced.
Running back position, I think we're on the two guys. Cam Akers at just $5K, Jerick McKinnon 5,100. It's just a big time. To see Clyde Edwards-Helaire priced up higher than both these guys just seems like an egregious pricing mishap, and then having to go up a full $1,000 to get to Mitchell, basically a full $2,000 to get all the way up to Joe Mixon. It does seem like with Akers and McKinnon, Andrew, even if there is, I think, some risk for Akers' role being dialed back after those two fumbles. Maybe, man, it was Sony Michel playing all 4 snaps after that second fumble on the final drive. With that said, I think, again, the price is cheap enough, and as we've kind of talked about in cash, we're fine eating the chalk if it helps us get the rest of the lineup where we want it to be in cash games. And I think Cam Akers is that guy. 41% projected ownership. McKinnon is the highest on the slate at 49%. We are seeing Clyde Edwards-Helaire right there, but I don't see the Clyde love, Andrew. Give me Jerick and give me Akers.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at with running back, you're just looking for the volume and the touches. And you look at this slate, we have 4, we have 4 teams, so we have 4 starting running backs, and it's pretty clear who should be the leader of each backfield just based on what we've seen. It's Akers, McKinnon, Mixon, and Mitchell. So, why am I going to pay $2,000 more for Mixon when Akers could get more touches than him, or McKinnon could catch more passes than him? It doesn't make any sense to do it. Obviously, in a tournament style, it's whichever one of these guys ends up scoring 3 times, that's going to be the guy that ultimately is in the tournament winning a lineup. But for a cash lineup, you're just trying to lock in that volume. And, don't pay up for it when you can get guys. I mean, Akers and McKinnon, Akers is going to be at least seeing 20 touches, and McKinnon, maybe not as much, but we know he's involved in the receiving game. PPR on DraftKings is the way that the format is scored. So, yeah, I mean, even with Edwards-Helaire, involved, Darrell Williams potentially coming back, I still think that McKinnon, why go away from this guy? He's been really productive for them. So I still think that he is the favorite to lead the backfield. Obviously, things can happen, randomness, but that's who I would lean on.
With, again, got to save a little bit of money somewhere to get these ballers, and that is going to be through going 2 tight ends. We need Travis Kelce to link with Mahomes. Obviously, after that, leaning towards Tyler Higbee. Obviously, it's going to be much tougher to get up from Higbee to Kittle. Why Higbee over Uzomah, Andrew? And I'm actually proud of you. I think you've come a long way for not going with Kendall Blanton and that 2,700 price tag. Maybe in a tournament or two. It is only 4 games playing after all. But, mature decision by you, my friend, here in the cash games. Higbee versus Uzomah. Just, I guess, with Higbee, we've been seeing more of it in recent weeks and more confidence kind of in that Rams passing attack.
Yeah, I like Higbee a little bit more based on his recent role. So 19% target share over the last 4 weeks, 19 catches, 221 receiving yards. Those are all second behind Travis Kelce of the remaining tight ends. So he's definitely clearly operating, pretty close to the second receiver alongside Odell Beckham Jr. in the Rams offense. Van Jefferson has really kind of fallen to the wayside, kind of similar to how Tyler Boyd has kind of fallen off a little bit for the Bengals. But I do think that Higbee, because he's been a little bit more involved, and if you look at Uzomah, and, we'll get into this when we talk about the props, his targets have been pretty good. He said, I think 6 targets, and I believe his last 5 or 6 games, which is really good. But his receiving yardage has kind of been inflated, I think, a little bit suspiciously, because he's had a bunch of big gains. So last week he had a 32-yard pickup, in the last play of the half. There was nobody covering him. It was a dump off from Joe Burrow, and he just ran 32 yards. He fought for
every one of those yards.
So 32 yards from a pretty, garbage play, something you're not going to expect to necessarily replicate. And then the week prior was against the Raiders, who are the worst team against tight ends, and he had another big gain for 29 yards. So, but weeks 7 through 17, he had 1 game with more than 36 receiving yards. So I think Uzomah, yes, if you just need someone to play as a floor, I'm okay, I can get that. But I do think that Higbee has the better floor ceiling combination. You look at what he's done against the 49ers, 3 touchdowns in 2 games against the 49ers. So if he catches a touchdown, he's automatically going to return on the investment. And then you get the added addition of targets and receptions that he's racking up in the Rams offense. So I do want to try to get up to Higbee. It's not even that much. I think Higbee, again, is really just underpriced. He has a really good role in the Rams offense, and he's at 3,700. I think he really should be priced closer to where Kittle is and not necessarily down where Uzomah is.
Higbee broke Dwayne's kind of tight end model type thing. Like there was like a certain threshold of snaps and routes, and basically every player that achieved this had been having a bunch of fantasy success over the years. Higbee was the one that broke it. All throughout the year, you're seeing these every down snap rates, a good amount of targets, and a good offense. But to your point, Andrew, 3 touchdowns on the year against the 49ers, 2 against the rest of the NFL. But hey, we're facing the 49ers, so let's go. Tyler Higbee locked and loaded in that flex spot. That is basically our cash game show. Again, Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, Cam Akers and McKinnon at running back. Kupp probably got to go down to Demarcus Robinson and then Jamar Chase at wide receiver. Higbee, Kelsey at tight end and flex. And then our 49ers, if you can get them on the defense special teams. Andrew, like people, like the whole Jimmy Garoppolo discussion, why isn't it as easy as saying like he got outscored by his special teams last week? Like, can we just end it with that, man? Like, let's give Nick Bosa and these guys some credit. I know it's the pump block team that got the job done, but I don't know, man. So I would agree that going with the 49ers probably makes the most sense there, just with the pressure. And Stafford, as we know, one of these guys that even when he does get the job done is, going to be out there throwing a couple picks, taking a few sacks from time to time as well. Any final cash game thoughts, Andrew?
So I know we have Chase in there. So if you, hypothetically speaking, if you move down from Chase to Higgins, what does that give you to then move off of Demarcus Robinson? Like what would the next best option be?
I don't hate that call. Let me get things going here. Because all right, you said like, how are they going to stop Chase? And I hear you, but we did just see them do a pretty damn good job on Stephon Diggs, and then accordingly allowing Gabriel Davis to go out. So, okay, we got McKinnon, Akers.
Because I mean, if I don't have to play Demarcus Robinson and just take a 0, I would ideally, I'd like that. Okay. And again, Higgins does see targets in the offense too. Again, I don't think it's as locked and loaded as Chase, but
it leaves us about 5K. So Ayuk, Kittle, that's better than Demarcus Robinson. I'll tell you that much. But now we're going to Higgins instead of Jamar Chase. So again, that's kind of like the 2v2 thing. I'm not saying you have to do that, but something between that, your 2 wide receiver spots. So I think everything else is pretty much shirt up. I'm not sure where else we would really be wanting going different directions there. So do you like Higgins and like an Ayuk or Kittle more than Chase and Robinson?
See, like,
I still lean Chase.
Yeah, like I don't like Robinson, but it's almost like if Chase scores 40 points, then it's like whatever. Robinson was the pathway to get to Chase, and I don't really care what Robinson does. And then you like mentioned those 5K guys. So you mentioned
we can go Mecole,
Kittle, and Ayuk, and it's like okay, one of those guys goes off, but it's just the 49ers are they need to fall behind. They're game script dependent. Only one of the 49ers receivers is going to be able to go off in any given week. It's like I'd almost rather play like Pringle, but then we're eating salary, and it's like gross. So yeah, I'll probably just stick with Chase.
What if we could go Mecole over Robinson? Does that fancy you a little bit more?
No, I really only like Pringle, Kyle. I really like Pringle in that range because he actually like leads the team in targets over the last 3 weeks. But
here's the worst part. This is the worst part. We just, again, with this shell, we could go off Mahomes if we really want to just completely rethink everything, but I don't think so. Like if we are literally $100 extra away if we go down from San Fran to Cincy defense and just say screw it, and then we still can't quite get up to Pringle. So that's the annoying part, man. I hear you. I want Pringle too. We could get Tyler Boyd if we move off of the 49ers defense. So there are some options in that, again, like that 4,200 and below range. Maybe you just want to punt and go with Jawan Jennings. I've heard of worse ideas as well. Either way, it's those 2 wide receiver spots that I think you, a devoted listener of the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast, are qualified to make on your own. Unfortunately, Andrew, I just don't think that we're going to get any sort of injury value. Spoiler, we will not be having our injury pod this week because there's just nothing really to talk about. Okay, real life football, absolutely. But, Honey Badger, he's in the concussion protocol. We'll see if he can clear it in time. Everyone else on the Chiefs is practicing in full. With the Bengals, all I need to worry about is, Cam Sample, Stanley Morgan, and some other backups really in a limited fashion. Their starters are all good to go. With the Rams, the only notable DMP was Van Jefferson, but Sean McVay already cleared up that was more of a knee/rest day, so not worried there. And then with the 49ers, like, we'll see, but Elijah Mitchell not practicing on Wednesday. He's kind of had this going on throughout the playoffs and the end of the season as well. And when you see Trent Williams also resting, Nick Bosa, Alex Mack, you just kind of get the sense that they're resting some of their more used players that are a little bit banged up because they've been playing football for 21 straight freaking weeks. So, so not going to get too much help on the injury injury front, alas, that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. Andrew, let's talk a little more about tournaments now, because it's a little bit different this week because of the 2-game slate. Usually at quarterback, your ownerships can be pretty flat across the position. Even like your highest projected ownership player usually isn't that much higher than 10%. And because of that, you don't have to pay as much attention to ownership at quarterback. Now, that's not true this week. We have some massive discrepancies. You guys can always check out our projected ownership over at pff.com/DFS/ownership. And Patrick Mahomes, far and away the number one highest projected owned QB at 66%. Then we got Joe Burrow at 24.7%. Matthew Stafford at 7%, and Jimmy Garoppolo at just 1.6%. I've been cracking up at, the dragon meme where it shows like the 3 fierce ones and then the one that looks like it maybe has like some mental health issues or whatever. And that's always the Jimmy G one, of course. But Andrew, for one Sunday and 2 games, like every tournament lineup I'm making, man, it's going to be led by Jimmy G or Stafford.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a ton of sense. And really you're just hoping that the Mahomes Burrow game doesn't go off. Like, you just have to hope that those guys have just games. I know I like the Burrow side specifically. Even at Burrow's percentage, where it's at 24%, I still think that's an interesting way to get off of Mahomes at really high. Because again, we obviously want to play a low roster quarterback, but there are other ways to get unique. And it might be like, I'll just play Mahomes, and then I'm going to hit on one of these other Chiefs guys. I'm going to play Edwards-Helaire instead of McKinnon. So there are ways to get different and still play a chalk, because if Mahomes goes out and scores 40 points, and it's like, probably doesn't matter what Stafford does or Jimmy G does, because you just don't have the raw points to get to where Mahomes is at. And you can still roster Chiefs players, you just don't necessarily roster the quarterback. So I do think that Burrow and Stafford are probably guys that'll try to adapt. I mean, especially Stafford too. I thought that was really low. I figured Mahomes was going to be the favorite. I figured Burrow would kind of come in at second, but between Burrow and Stafford, they're pretty closely priced. I thought that we would see more of that flatten out a little bit. But I mean, Stafford, again, maybe people are just not buying in still. And when you look at the matchup for him against the 49ers, again, he hasn't been great against San Francisco when he's played him this year. And last week, I know you mentioned it when we were talking about tournaments in Matthew Stafford, how heavy the Buccaneers are at blitzing. And the 49ers are not like that. The 49ers have blitzed Stafford 10 times in the 2 games that he's played. All the other dropbacks, he has 71 other non-blitz dropbacks.
And on those plays, he's 8 for 9, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He massacres the blitz.
Yes, exactly. So it's like, all right, just don't pull the engage 8. I know I do it in Madden all the time, and I get really pissed off. I'm just like, whatever, sending everybody engage 8, and then touchdown. Oh, of course, that's exactly what happens. So I do think Stafford, you know who to stack him with, and you'll know because that's the second game. So if Burrow and Mahomes kind of like are they pour like 20, 18 points or something like that, then you're like, you have a shot to play Stafford. So I probably can't get behind Jimmy G. Honestly, I mean, I don't know. I think playing Stafford is good enough to get different.
I stopped picking actual defensive plays in NCAA football about 5 years ago. We just go 3-5-3. All the linebackers are blitzing, and I user control whoever is like supposed to guard the running back. So we are cover 0 every single play. Give up the touchdown and give the ball back to the offense, or we'll make a big play on defense. I refuse to waste my life watching the computer pick apart his own defense, time and time again, drive again. So everyone, I would encourage you, listen to the podcast Dwayne and I recorded if you want a lot more, in-depth blitz, the best matchups and things like that information. But that kind of is why I'm willing to get off of Mahomes here in the tournament, because I think this is a sneaky, tough matchup. We saw this Bengals defense do a great job against Mahomes in that first game. I get it. He still was able to put up, I believe, 31 points on the afternoon, but this was actually combined. If you look at what Kelsey and Tyreek Hill did, I mean, they only combined to average 5.9 yards per reception. That was their lowest mark all season long. What happened? I mean, Mecole Hardman made a 53-yard over-the-shoulder catch downfield. Pringle had a 27-yard catch. Robinson, 29 yards. Blake Bell, 24 yards. All the guys that usually aren't supplying the big plays did that day, and it worked out fine enough. But, man, you look at last week and Mahomes not having a single pass, thrown 20 yards downfield for the first time in his career. And the one way of looking at it is look, he's figured out how to beat these 2 high looks. Everything is great now. There's no way of ever slowing down Mahomes. But I also kind of look at it and it's okay, if we can avoid letting Tyreek Hill, completely break our next-gen stats like expected receiving yards here. Mecole Hardman did the same thing on that rush attempt. I don't want to call it like fluky or lucky, Andrew. They made those plays in a big game against a better defense, I think, than the Bengals. But we saw the Bengals have some success against this group. They have a talented secondary. We saw that against the Titans. I just think this one could be, a little bit rougher for Mahomes and company than perhaps we're giving credit for. So in cash, it's 66%. Just take your square there and we'll compete with everyone else. But I do like the call of going elsewhere in tournaments. And to your original point, that discrepancy between Burrow and Stafford isn't big enough. So I'm absolutely fine going with Burrow in tournaments as well. Talk a little running back here. So we talked in cash about wanting Akers and McKinnon. I want to look at how the cheapest we can get, the most disgusting we can go, because there's basically 3 guys under 5K that if you want to differentiate a lineup, I do think one of them is in play. It's not Samaje Perine, 2 or fewer touches in 5 straight games. It's not Kyle Juszczyk. He hasn't had 5 touches in the game other than when Trey Sermon basically led the backfield there for 1 week and they still didn't trust him against the Packers. What about Sony Michel, Andrew? Cam Akers did fumble twice in a playoff game. He was dominating usage before that, but again, Sony came in every single snap on the last drive. 2 weeks ago, it was split between Sony and Akers. I mean, at a minimum, bro, I think we're going to see Sony have a higher touchdown than these guys, and crazier things have happened in a 2-game slate. So God forbid Akers happens to get a little banged up during the game. I do think if you want to do a shot in the dark tournament play, it's Sony Michel. He gives you huge upside. God forbid something happens to Akers, and there's a chance that I think it could just be split based on the end of last week.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. And it makes perfect sense with the context of the slate. They play in the late afternoon. So if you're sitting on Cam Akers and you stacked Mahomes with the wrong receiver, or the wrong, it was Hardman, you needed not Pringle, it was Higgins, you needed to not Chase, something like that happens. You're like, I got to catch the field. You swap off Akers, who you have in your lineup, and you play Michel instead. Doesn't matter what salary at that point. Who cares if you're eating, whatever the discrepancy between the 2 players is. You need to just get different. And the amount of times I've been ready to late swap and play this fringy running back. I'm like, all right, I know this is what I'm supposed to do. It's when you late swap, you should feel uncomfortable. It should feel weird, and that means you're doing it the correct way. So I remember I was swapping. It was a couple weekends ago when it was the Chiefs, and I was swapping to Derek Gore because I was oh man, I need a running back, and of course it was McKinnon. It wasn't Derek Gore, and I was like, oh man, I was the process was right, but I just didn't execute it. So I think that Michel makes, of course, it's going to be Jake Funk that, goes out and has a 2-touchdown game. But yeah, if you're not cashing or your lineup, you have a couple misses, especially because we're going to know, who the players you needed going into the second game are. If you don't have the guy that scores 30 points on a 1 or 2 game slate, then you're screwed. You have to get someone else that's going to be lower rostered, which Sony Michel definitely is in this case.
Real quick now with the wide receiver position, I just want to kind of go over some of the pecking orders that we saw in the last round. So if you are, looking to try to, again, dumpster dive, hopefully you're actually doing with someone that will be on the field a little bit. With the Chiefs, Tyreek Hill, 83% snaps, Byron Pringle, 76%, DeMarcus Robinson, 64%, Mecole Hardman down there at 41%. But Mecole does have 5 rush attempts over the past 3 weeks. I would still probably lean Mecole just a little bit ahead of DeMarcus Robinson if you could, but I understand if you answer would rather be no when you can help it and get up to Byron Pringle. With the 49ers, this is where it's a little interesting. So Ayuk 96%, Debo 69%, and Juwan Jennings at 56%. And we're seeing him really sitting as the cheapest possible guy that we could have any sort of expectations for at 3,200. My apologies, everyone. I brought up this quote a few times, and I think I probably just misinterpreted it wrong when I first heard about it. But the statement that Kyle Shanahan made about Juwan Jennings, playing like he's blacked out, I took as a negative. I think it was meant as much more as a positive. This is the full quote. Juwan, he's going so hard. He's always borderline. I'd say 95% blacked out, which makes you play at a certain level, which is awesome. That other 5%, he knows how to play within the lines and be smart about it. So hand up, my bad, not a negative. I was saying this in looking forward to the potential for Mohamed Sanu to come back. He hasn't come back yet, so it's all good, Andrew. Haven't had a chance to go in with my stupid original idea. We've relearned the information, we've adjusted, and we're now back in on Juwan Jennings. I don't know how tuned in people are going to be to Mohamed Sanu coming back into this situation, but it might not matter, man. Right now, again, on our ownership dashboard, 3.1% ownership for Juwan Jennings. He scored 2 touchdowns the last time these guys matched up. If you need a price saver on this slate, it's got to be Juwan Jennings.
Yep. Yeah, you just got to late swap to some of these fringier players, especially if we get like an inactive that Mohamed Sanu's not even playing. Like that would be like, that would make you feel really good about the Jennings play, because that's just the one concern. It's like if Sanu is active, it's like, oh no, like is his snaps going to get cut from 60% now to 30%? And that just makes it much more tougher to get behind him. It's like, you don't almost even think about, oh, Mohamed Sanu, does he throw a touchdown in this game? Like, I wonder what, what are the odds on that Mohamed Sanu comes back and throws a touchdown like that? I'm all over that type of conference championship bet. But I do think that another guy that's interesting from the receiver. So Van Jefferson, so he's down kind of where basically he's the next lowest rostered or projected rostered wide receiver in front of Jennings. So Van Jefferson, so he's at 3,900. And I mean, it makes sense like why he's not popular, because his target share has dwindled, it's down to 10% over the last 4 weeks. He's really getting, not nearly as involved as like Higbee, Odell Beckham. And I actually a lot of unders on his props, but again, sometimes props don't hit, sometimes I'm wrong. And the one thing that I noticed about Jefferson, at least looking at him last week, so he saw 4 targets, 2 of which were high value targets. So something I look at every single week, looking at, okay, who's seeing downfield targets? And in a week where we really didn't see much downfield targets like at all, Van Jefferson did get some. Like he got 1 downfield target. He also got a target in the end zone. So at 3,900, Van Jefferson can deliver 1 big play that could end up being the difference in a 2-game slate. So yes, the peripheral metrics are terrible for Jefferson. Would not want to play him in cash because he could literally go out and do 0. But if you need an upside play that's cheap, that you get off of, if you play Odell Beckham, okay, you play Van Jefferson instead in the second window, I think that would make a lot of sense.
Speaking of Van, he is now fully in the 3 wide receiver set. Like we have Ben Skowronek out there for Bennett. Skowronek, excuse me, out there for really like splitting reps with him for a week or two. Last week, though, Kupp 100% snaps, OBJ 92%, Van Jefferson 90%. Basically, same thing with the Bengals. They've been like our nice godsend here in the usage takeaways. They do the same thing every week. Boyd, Chase, Higgins out there in 3 wide. Uzama's an every down tight end. Joe Mixon might lose a couple pass down snaps to Samaje Perine. They throw him the ball, and he's got the biggest workload of any running back remaining, basically. Now, there is Kendall Blanton sitting there. He scored a touchdown last week. He's only 2.7K. I can't do it, Andrew. This guy has run 4 routes last week, 3 routes the week before, 3, 2, 1 before that. You have to go back to week 14, 15 to find the last time that he was anything resembling really involved in this offense, and that was heavily assisted by injuries that are no longer on the table. So, yeah, Andrew, as much as, we love our cheap tight ends, I think Uzama is probably the lowest we can go in this one. And if you want to save the most money possible, I just think it's Juwan Jennings.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And really that's, Blanton is really a play for if you're doing 150 lineups, and that's where you have to incorporate, injuries. Like, because if there is a guy that gets hurt in mid game and then one of these guys pops off, like no one's going to play them. And that's kind of why I try to stick more towards some smaller field GPPs. So that way you don't get beat by that. Because it sucks when, you don't have Kendall Blanton because you didn't think he was going to play at all. And then he does because Tyler Higbee, pulls his hamstring or something like that happens. And that's part of how you have to play when you play in some of these large field tournaments. You have to kind of think a little bit outside the box. I mean, if you're literally in a tournament with hundreds of thousands of people, like, you have to really
play the backup quarterbacks at that point, man. Like there's, and that's the thing. Like, when we talked about this, like great quote from, my old editor does great stuff. Fade the noise, Matthew Friedman. Like, contrarianism is not a license to be an effing moron. So we need to try to find that line between, yes, being different, trying to think about the, all the possible outcomes, and also not just playing a bunch of horrendous guys that are never going to touch the football. But no, I think that's a good point, Andrew. If you are doing like the 150 lineups things, guys like Kendall Blanton, especially your Sony Michels of the world. And hey, I mean, looking at the 49ers, who would be Jeff? Is it Jeff Wilson? I guess they're giving Elijah everything.
Trey Lance. Sprinkle some Trey Lance just in case.
My goodness. Now I'm just trying to, who was their number 2? Because I mean, it's just been Elijah, Debo, and Juszczyk actually touching it.
Yeah, well, Wilson, I know, but he's kind of banged up, and then JaMychal Hasty's the other running back they have.
Okay, no, yeah, it was Hasty was actually the one that did steal a couple snaps last week. So yeah. You think Mitchell, is going to suffer if you're just able to predict if you predicted Raheem Mostert was only going to play 2 snaps this year, and you got a funny feeling about Elijah Mitchell, JaMychal Hasty is probably that guy, pal. All right, everyone, that's going to wrap up our DFS conversation. But Andrew has some props for us once again. My man went 6-1 last week, absolutely crushing it. Josh Allen over 48.5 rushing yards, cashed. Aaron Jones under 48.5, cash. Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow overs, easy cashes. Tannehill under 235.5 passing yards, no problemo. And Jeff Swaim under 2 receptions. Favorite one of the week comes true. Only one we couldn't get Andrew was Elijah Mitchell over 71.5 rushing yards, but again, 6-1. How can anyone complain? Couldn't be me. What do you got for the people this week?
Yeah, no, the Elijah Mitchell one was like one I felt pretty good about too, especially because the game script was like perfect for him, just like keep getting the rock, and it wasn't like, oh, they fell behind and he got game scripted out, but it just didn't work out. But yes, the Tennessee Titans, just seeing those donuts put up by those 2 guys, man, that felt great on a Saturday evening. But so for this week, I do like a lot of the props. So I mentioned Van Jefferson before, and right now, so his receptions prop, is at 2.5. And I mean, that's simply just too large of a number for a guy that has hit this number. I'm just double checking right now to make sure I have the right numbers in front of me, but he's gone over this number once in his last 7 games. Like I think that's a hit rate that you definitely want to bet on. And I know I talked about he could deliver in DFS. He could do that in 2 catches. Like he could catch an 80-yard touchdown, and that's still hitting the under on 2.5 receptions. Like, so that's like the difference. And that's kind of why I think and I think as fantasy players, you have an edge with some of these receiving yards props, receptions props, because you know how they're used. Like, you know that Tyler Boyd is a guy you probably don't want to bet a lot of unders on from receptions, but you want to bet the unders on his receiving yards because he has a lower average depth of target. Things like that I think are really key and can help us expose some of these lines. So that's one thing I like with Van Jefferson, under 2.5 receptions based on his 10% target share over the last 4 weeks. This one is definitely, I think, my favorite. Patrick Mahomes over 26.5 rushing yards.
Yeah.
He hit the over last week when it was at 20 rushing yards. I think it was basically on that first scramble. I was like, all right, boom, like Patrick Mahomes at the over. And it just has to go with the fact that the dude just turns on the rushing in the playoffs. His last 8 playoff games is averaging 36 rushing yards per game. He had 69 last week against the Buffalo Bills. So I just think that, Patrick Mahomes, and it's up since the regular season. He was at 22 rushing yards per game, 36 in the playoffs, last 8 playoff games. So I think Mahomes just, keep taking the overs on his rushing props in the playoffs. Elijah Mitchell under.
Hey, real quick, there's a cool thread on Twitter from Bobby Strope at Bobby Strope, and he was talking about what is game speed versus 40 time and some stuff like that. He's a health performance and player development consultant for the NFL, and he was breaking down Patrick Mahomes. He says that world-class athletes can run circle patterns at 80% of their max sprint speed, but somehow Patrick Mahomes can run it at 103%. I think that's based on his 40 time from what we got from 5 years ago, whenever it was. So Patrick Mahomes is actually running just the dude is a freaking complete freak out there. Freaking freak. Great vocabulary use there, Ian. But I think it applies, man. I sent out a tweet this week of just every Mahomes scramble from the game. The amount of sacks that this dude just casually avoids. And then, and then he's also, I think, the best quarterback in the league at pretending to go out of bounds. And at the last second, he cuts up field for a few more. Just absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. To see that only 26.5. We've also seen him, again, be far more willing to run the ball in the playoffs when it's last game of the year, can't hold anything back, as opposed to regular season. So last week you had me at Jeff Swaim under 2 receptions, Andrew. This week that Mahomes rushing yards has the Ian Hartitz stamp of approval. All your props get my stamp of approval, but this one especially so.
No, yeah, I mean, this one I bet several times, probably going to bet a couple more times. We'll have a few drinks on Saturday night and be like, hey, is Patrick Mahomes' line at 40 yards yet? No, okay, it's not. All right, let's move this line. My goal is to get up to 60 rushing yards, but that's when it starts. That should be the goal of the PFF subscribers. Elijah Mitchell under 2 receptions. So Mitchell is the bell cow for the 49ers, but they really like to feature him more on the ground than through the air. I know he had 3 catches and 3 targets last week, but overall the sample size, he has 8 targets in his last 4 games. and he's actually has 0 catches against the Rams this season. In the 2 games he's played against the Rams, they have not featured him whatsoever in the passing game. And he's still working in somewhat of a tandem when it comes to routes run with Kyle Juszczyk out of the backfield. So it was 50-50 last week. Juszczyk has actually run more routes over the last 4 weeks. So if I'm going to bet on one of these guys actually kind of breaking out a little bit more in the passing, I'll probably actually lean more towards Juszczyk, who actually has like one of the higher average depth of targets for a running back / fullback player. Like they actually will have him run downfield routes, get him out of the wheel routes, get him out of the backfield and kind of surprise downfield. So I'm going to go with Elijah Mitchell under 2 receptions. Next one up, Cam Akers under 58.5 rushing yards. So obviously all the concerns about, okay, is like Sony Michel going to have like a role? Like that's like one way that this just hits because they just split the backfield a little bit more. Akers isn't as featured as we think that he will be. Okay, that's an easy way to kind of hit on this prop. But then the other aspect is you look at this 49ers run defense. It's, it's funny because we've talked about, I've taken unders on running backs facing the 49ers defense like the last 3 weeks. It was Green Bay last week. The week before it was Dallas. So it's like, this is a run defense you do not want to play running backs against, especially on the ground. You look at what they've done since week 10, only one running back has gone to 47 rushing yards. PFF's 6th highest graded run defense since week 10. They held Michelle to 43 yards and 21 carries in week 18.
Dude, they're the only defense in the entire league allowing less than 1 yard before contact per carry. Like, remember how just terrified everyone was of the Buccaneers for the first 2 months of the year? That's like what the 49ers have now been for the entire season.
Yeah. So, and I know that the Cam Akers story is obviously amazing, coming back from the Achilles injury. And it seems like just everybody loves him on Twitter. Dynasty Twitter loves him. I have him already ranked as like a top 7 running back for 2022. But I mean, the guy's not been efficient, and that's not necessarily all on him. They're just pounding him in between the tackles on 1st and 2nd down, but he's averaged 2.5 yards per carry en route to a 40.6 PFF rushing grade this postseason. So Akers hasn't really been super efficient coming back from the Achilles injury. So even with volume, I just don't think that he's going to get to this number. 58.5 rushing yards, I think, is actually a little bit too high, especially if Michelle has a larger workload than we are all anticipating. CJ Uzoma, tight end for the Bengals. His receiving prop is really, really high, 40.5 receiving yards. I know I mentioned it earlier. It's kind of boosted just from those last 2 games where he had plays of 29 yards, 32 yards. I mean, he's 40 yards. It's never been that high all year. And so for it to just kind of explode up because of some recency bias, I think is just a little bit, is a good reason to go on the under. And then last but not least is Byron Pringle, 33.5 receiving yards. Pringle was very close to getting to his yardage last week. It was at 35.5. It actually got bet down to 30.5, and I was sweating because he got 29 receiving yards last week. But he still had 7 targets. He caught 5 passes, and just somehow didn't get to 30 receiving yards, and he caught 5 passes just because of, like you mentioned, Mahomes just wasn't throwing the ball downfield, and Pringle was not. He actually dropped 2 passes too, so he did not he was so close to getting there. Every time he got a target, I was like, Pringle, it's my guy. But he's actually been playing more out of the slot. So I do like that against the Bengals, ranked 30th in yards allowed to slot receivers this season. So Byron Pringle, I'm going back to the over at 35.5 receiving yards. I think it's actually been bet down again to 33.5 because just people are fading the Pringle. Not me. Could it be me, Ian? So going back to over on Byron Pringle.
Quickly recapping those: Van Jefferson under 2.5 receptions, Patrick Mahomes over 26.5 rushing yards, Elijah Mitchell under 2 receptions, Cam Akers under 58.5 rushing yards, CJ Uzomah under 40.5, 39.5 receiving yards, wherever you can get it, and Byron Pringle over 33.5 receiving yards. Like it, Andrew. Again, 6-1 last week. We go over we haven't kept your record for the entire season. I think maybe you were 0-2 1 week throughout there. We tell everyone how the previous week went, and to your credit, man, you're nailing these things time and time again. Let's try to end it on a good stretch. That's going to wrap up this edition of the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Make sure you check out all of Andrew's always excellent work on PFF.com. I got a few, cool things up there as well. And yeah, this will be our last DFS show of the year. We'll be back for some Super Bowl stuff. We're going to incorporate that into a mega preview, props, DFS, all that goodness in the one episode that you can always find wherever you listen to this podcast. So, Andrew, anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, man, just make sure you go check out some of my work. Got the DFS cheat sheets up on the site. You also have more rankings, 2022 rankings. If you're looking forward to next season regular draft, we got free agency primers on all the positions, quarterbacks, receivers are written up. We're going to have running backs, tight ends also coming in the coming weeks. And then Dynasty Talk rookies got the top 5 rookie running backs. So if you've just been so engulfed in NFL action and you're like, who are these players? Like, who's going to be Najee Harris? Who's going to be the next Javonte Williams? I got you covered.
Plenty of Dynasty Talk. We'll also be on your feed this Friday. I'm having Nate Liss on the pod. You might know him as @an_outraged_Jew on Twitter, one of the more creative and unique, I think, handles I've seen out there. But Nate always brings a lot of fire. Him and Matt Kelly do fantastic stuff at Player Profiler. Keep an eye out for that. We'll have much more Dynasty content start ramping up as soon as we get done with Championship Sunday. So for Andrew, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Until next time, take care, everybody.